good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Where is everyone joining from today, and how is your day going? Hello, hello. We're going to be starting a live watercolor class in just a few minutes. From Sweden, hello to Sweden. Slovenia, Michigan. I don't know why, but it makes me so excited to see when we have such a geographically diverse group. Ohio, Oregon, Poland, hello, Texas. I'm in Colorado, just for reference. Nova Scotia. The Netherlands. Wow, we have a real international crew today. BC. Mississippi, hello, hello. Another from Poland, wow. Just so you guys know, I did do a little question on Instagram, seeing what people wanted to paint, and the most common things were sunsets and something that was spring-like. So I've decided to combine the two, and we're going to do a sunset landscape with kind of like a field of flowers in the foreground. And we're going to be kind of doing this old school. If you've been around these parts for a while, I used to do where we would cut a bunch of pieces of paper, and I've cut quite a few little pieces of paper. These are about 4 by 4 inches. You can see the size of my hand. And we're going to be doing like 3 or 4 of these paintings during class so that we can see how we can take the same concept and with different colors and a couple little variations, we can change a whole bunch of stuff. So if you feel like painting along today, you can do this in whatever you want, but the way I'm going to be doing it is I've got some little pieces of paper, and so I'm going to be doing, I think, about 4 of these. So if you want to do the same way, you're going to want to grab maybe some cardboard. I just have some extra pieces of cardboard that I'm going to tape them down to, your watercolors, and some paper. Hello to Canada. We'll be getting started in about a minute, but if you want to start your prep now, now's a good time to do that. I'm going to start by taping down a few of my pieces. And I might actually be able to fit 2 on each one of these. So yeah. So I'm just going to take this little piece of paper, or cardboard, and tape down 2 pieces of paper to each one of these. And yeah, if you can't make it for the whole thing, I do upload these to YouTube afterwards, as long as they save. Hello. So we'll be working on 2 to 4 at a time. We'll probably paint all the skies first, and then we'll work on the layers, which will allow some things to kind of dry in between, and you can see a whole bunch of different variations. All right, so welcome everybody. It is time to get started. My name is Lacey. I'm the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts, in case you're new around here. And every other week we paint together live. So if you want to, you can follow along. If you want to just watch to have some inspiration for later, that's totally fine. But this is kind of meant to be a little bit of kind of an interactive painting session. So I encourage you, if you're in a place to do this, to grab your paints and get ready to paint with me. Also, happy April Fool's Day to everyone, and we can use April Fools as a little present to us, because if any of your paintings turn out bad, you can say, just April Fools, that was supposed to be that way. It wasn't supposed to be good. All right, so I've got a couple taped down. We'll tape down some more in a little bit. We're going to be starting with, again, I did a little poll on Instagram, and the two themes that people really wanted were sunsets and really vibrant skies, as well as spring vibes. Also, I'm getting a little bit of light because it is starting to kind of be spring here. So we'll have some light issues today. But we're going to combine those two things by doing kind of a sunset type vibe, or even you could be a sunrise if you prefer. And then we're going to kind of do like a Field of Flowers-esque inspired. So it's kind of springy, kind of that, so we can do a little bit of both. All right, yeah, we're using watercolor paper right now. What I'm going to be painting on today is Canson 140 pound. And in the comments, why don't you guys tell me, what kind of sunset do you want to see for the first one? What colors are you looking for so that we can see? I'm going to grab my watercolors and I'm going to give them a good spritz so that they are ready to go when I'm ready to go. Off screen, I have a brush and I've got 2 cups of water. Happy birthday to your sister. I don't know if I said that already. We've got a lot of suggestions for purple. Lots of purples. Okay. Yeah, let's do like a purple and a pink one, and then maybe on the bottom we'll do purple, pink, and a little bit of like orange or yellow. I think I'm going to paint about 4 of these, so we'll be able to do some variation. So, if you have everything ready to go, for those of you who are painting along, are you still setting up? Do you need a little more time, or are you ready to get started? I'm going to go ahead and wipe out one of these wells just so I have a little extra space. I probably should have done that before class, but you know. 1 more minute, please. Okay, yes. We'll wait for just a second. If you're like, I want to follow along, but I'm nervous, these are beginner friendly, so feel free to grab, and these are really adaptable. I love doing these little mountain landscapes because we can use each element we add to what I call hide or highlight things. So if you mess up in one part, it's not a big deal. We can just kind of adapt to it. Yes, we're using watercolors today. I have been thinking about doing some stuff with acrylic because I do paint acrylic, but I don't. It's funny, I feel like I'm a better acrylic painter, but I don't think I think I'm a better watercolor teacher. And yeah, the tutorial, as long as it saves, I will be uploading it later. Okay, so I think I'm going to get started. This first part is going to be pretty easy. Before we start, what I want to say is, with sunsets, remember every sunset is different, and I want you to kind of go with the flow and try not to overwork this and try not to over control it. Our biggest thing, and the most thing we're going to have the most control over, is adding the water to the page. I mean, we have control over everything, but some of the little magical interactions that are just going to happen naturally are going to be what's going to really make this magic. So lean into that. But I want you to start by just filling your entire page with a coat of water. And if you've got a light source next to you, when we're working wet on wet, depending on how much control you want over it, you can kind of check it by grabbing a light source and see how it's just shiny, and we cannot really see the texture of the paper except for maybe on the side over here. I'm going to have absolutely no control at this point if I try to put my colors on. So I can either dry my brush off and then kind of wipe it away a little bit, or I can wait for it to soak in just a minute. And I'm going to wait because I want this to be kind of shiny, but I want it to start to kind of be mattifying, and I want to start to be able to see the texture of the paper come through so that it's still going to bleed and do fun things, but it's going to listen a little more when I tell it what I want it to do. You can kind of see that starting to happen where we can kind of start to see some of the textures. A little bit. And you can always, like there's a spot over here that's drying a little bit more. You can always add in a little more water to areas that you need to at this point. All right, can you kind of see how now we're starting to get more of the texture of the paper showing through on that reflection there? So we're getting close. I'm going to start to prep, and what I'm going to do, so we said we were going to do purples and pinks on the top one, and then the bottom one we're going to move into adding a couple more colors. So what I'm going to do is take my brush, and I'm going to swirl it around in that purple color, and I'm going to put a little more water in my brush just so I have this a little more readily available in this nice consistency. And when I grab this color, I don't want there to be a ton in my brush, so I'm going to kind of wipe a little bit. And then I'm just going to come up in here while this is still wet, so you can still see the reflection, but we can kind of see the texture. And I'm just going to start to kind of drop some of this color in here, just kind of scribbling. I want it to be a little more intense in a couple areas, so I'm going to grab a little more straight from the pan and maybe tap off. And I'm going to add that in. I want some variation. I want this to kind of have a lot of variation in it, and I want it to be kind of soft. Then I'm going to take, without washing my brush, I'm going to grab a little of this pink, and let's start to incorporate that. You can do this with whatever colors. You don't have to use the colors that I'm using. However, make sure you're going to choose colors that aren't going to mix to be colors that you don't want to be, like purple and pink mix together really nice. Now I am going to wash my brush because I want this bottom part to be more intense and just kind of that pink color. So I'm going to take a little bit of this, and now I'm going to start to kind of place this in here so that it's just pink. And then I'm going to wash my brush, and I'm just going to soften down because I want it to be nice and soft. And that's also going to kind of have this fun effect where it's going to kind of pull it down. Yours can look totally different than mine, and that's totally fine. If you're like, oh, that's too much right there, we can always just take a dry brush and kind of just pick up a little bit. And I think I'm going to leave it there like that for now. And we're just going to kind of wait and see what happens. If we like it, if we want to change it, it's going to kind of change a little bit as we go. We can always add a second layer if we want some areas to be more intense and some areas to be less intense. So today I'm using a brush that's kind of like a quill brush, and these are actually ones that I finally got my order in, so I will be selling these soon. But a round brush of any sort, a size like 8, 10, or 12 will work really good for today's tutorial. All right, so this next one we're going to do down here. We might put another layer on this, but for now we're just going to kind of let it chill out and see what happens. But this one down here, let's do one where we start with some blues, and we mainly do have the pinks and the purples, but then we're going to add in some yellow. And I want to keep in mind a couple things. So when we mix pink and purple together, they're just going to make kind of pinky purple. But if we were to mix maybe this purple color and then a yellow, we don't necessarily want this kind of grayish color in our sky, or brownish grayish color. Those aren't going to mix together to make the nicest color in a sky. The same is going to go for if we have a blue. If we have a blue and we have a yellow, we don't necessarily want green in our sky. That's not going to be great either. So we're going to be placing all these in on wet, and we do run the risk of having them run together. But what we're going to do is just be smart in the way we order these colors. So notice that up here I've got blue. I do have some pink and some purple that touch in there because all those colors play nicely together. But notice that pink is my buffer between purple and between yellow, because when we mix pink with yellow, we're going to get kind of a nice soft orange. And when we mix pink with purples and blues, we're just going to get more kind of purples and blues. So we really want to make sure that our buffer color is going to be separating any color that's not going to play nicely with the colors above it. So So, I mean, you can paint, oops, ooh, look at that. All right, so we're gonna have an opportunity for learning. I accidentally drug something over this, and see how I've got a little mark here. So this one we're definitely gonna be adding a second layer on, and I can show you how to kind of hide little mistakes like that. I'm just gonna leave it be for now, and it's gonna be totally fine. We're gonna be able to fix it in another layer. So what I'm gonna do for this one is I'm gonna start the same way, where I'm going to wet the entire page. So I'm gonna wash my brush and then grab some water in it, and I'm gonna wet this whole thing again. Just making sure there's a nice even coat of that water across. And then I'm gonna start to kind of prepare while I'm waiting for this to soak in to the paper a little bit. So I'm going to be grabbing some of this blue. This is kind of similar to like a Prussian ultramarine type blue, just to kind of prepare. I will be dipping right into this, and then this is kind of a magenta color that I'm going to dip into, and then this is like a medium yellow color here. Hello, hello. All right, let's just double check the wetness. We're at a pretty good stage, so I'm going to actually get started other than grabbing just a little bit of what's down here. And then I'm going to start with this darker blue color. It's going to get diluted because we're putting it onto water. And I'm just going to put this kind of in a corner here. Then I'm going to wash my brush. Then I'm going to grab a little bit of this purple, and let's place this here. Remember, this is on a nice wet area already. Okay, I'm gonna add a little more purple, maybe a little down here. I'm just trying to get some variation. Now I'm gonna wash my brush again, and now we're going to be focusing on this color that's our buffer color. So this is my magenta color here. And we're gonna place this just right in here, just to kind of get a little variation between the two. And then I'm gonna make sure that there's quite a bit of it as that buffer before I decide where I'm gonna put my like sunset spot. So wash my brush. I'm going to grab some of this yellow, and I think I want my sunset to be kind of over here. I'm just going to place this like right kind of in here. And I can get a little brave as long as I'm not going to touch it to where the purple is, because I've got my nice buffer color. Wash my brush again, tap it off, and then I'm just going to soften that out. Now we have a really interesting looking sky. Again, these could be more vibrant, especially if I wanted to use darker colors. I usually like to kind of err on the side of like a nice light wash, because I can always add a second layer and I can always make it more vibrant. When I try to go in and kind of correct that, either while I'm painting, I either overwork it or it just looks kind of goofy. So I like to kind of go in a little bit lighter and then wait for it to dry so I can kind of assess the situation and see what I want to modify for the next layer. So oh, hello to Hungary. I'm using Canson XL paper today, which is a nice kind of beginner watercolor paper. So this is what it looks like, just in case. And this is one of those ones that, this is widely available in most countries, as well as it's usually sold at the bigger art supply stores, so you can usually get this one for pretty cheap with the coupons and stuff. This is not a cotton paper. It is not like a gold standard paper, but you know, this channel is mainly aimed at like beginner or people who like to do art for the sake of doing art, which means that you're probably doing a lot of art, and unless you have just a really high budget, then using something like Arches is going to be really expensive. And so while this isn't the best paper in the world, it does work pretty well. And it's also something that we aren't going to feel bad if we accidentally waste it, or if we just keep painting and painting and painting. All right, so at this point, what I'm going to do is these need to dry. I'm going to give you guys two options. The first option is that I can use my heat gun and I can go ahead and dry these. The second option is for me to tape down 2 more pieces and we can work on a couple more skies while we're waiting for these ones to settle down. So you guys let me know, do you want me to do a couple more skies, or do you want me to try to complete these 2 before we move on to the other 2 paintings? Got 1 vote for heat gun. think More Skies is beating out Heat Gun a little bit. No. Okay, I'm losing the plot. I'm gonna have to, let's see, how do I do, I feel like there's gotta be a way for me. How do I do one of those interactive things? Okay, we're gonna do a poll. Sorry, I'm gonna be texting. This is my, oh, are we back or not? Sorry, I'm trying to do this. This is hard to type with this in my little... Oh, this is not the right thing. This is 5 minutes for a poll. We don't want to wait 5 minutes. All right, I'm gonna try to just look. Oh man. Yeah, you can use a blow dryer if you don't have a heat gun. All right, we're gonna do the heat gun. I think that one beat out just a little bit. It'll also, in case anybody needs to leave early, it'll allow us to actually finish some of these ones a little bit faster so that you can see something to completion if you have time constraints. So, also somebody asked about the tape. This is just a very generic masking tape. It's nothing special about it. It's just a cheap masking tape. All right, so for those of you who are new around here, if you can use a heat gun, you can use a hair dryer to dry your pieces if you're impatient. This does make quite a bit of noise, so if you are sensitive to noise, now is a really good time to turn your volume down for about 30 seconds. And I will give you a countdown in 3, 2, and 1. All right, those should be pretty much dry. Yeah, we're really watching paint dry, exactly. Also, yeah, the live paused because I was trying to do the poll, but I accidentally hit the home button on my phone, which then apparently exited me out of the live for just a moment. All right, so what we did first was we did a wet on wet layer where we are kind of trying to do sunset type things. In the first one, we just used two kind of colors that are complementary and are just, well, they're actually not complementary colors, but they are ones that play nice together. And the second one, we kind of explored some buffer colors. And what we're doing now is assessing our colors and also the paintings, because we do have the option to do a second layer. Now, usually my best advice for you, if you're not in love with your first layer that you do for a sky or anything like that, is to let it dry completely instead of continuing to fuss with it. Let it dry completely and then we can address it. So for example, we're definitely doing a second layer on this one because when I was showing you something else, I accidentally kind of moved this across it and some of the fabric from this sucked up some of there. So I have a little weird area here that I don't particularly want in the painting. And this one, I could go either way. This one could be really fun once I frame it, but I feel like it could be a little more vibrant, and I'm kind of thinking I'm going to do a second layer on that one too, just for the sake of it. But you don't have to. So I want you to take a look at yours if you're painting along. If you like yours, you don't need to do another layer. If you're not convinced of yours, then yeah, let's do another layer together. So the key here when you do a second layer in watercolor, because you can layer with watercolor, is you want to use a really light touch. So when we are moving across the page, maybe I can show you on this. If I fill my brush with water and I very kind of lightly go over this, see this is now wet on the top part here. I don't know if you can see the reflection, but it's pretty much undisturbed. But a lot of times I see beginners when they do a second layer is they'll take their brush and they really drag it across, which is going to pick up some of that pigment, and it's going to kind of actually pick some of it up and it's going to distribute it. So we want to have a really light touch when we do this. I like to think about it like we're just kind of creating surface tension between the brush and the page. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill my brush, and we're just going to start basically the same way. This is dry. We want to do second layers on completely dry layers. And now I'm just going to start the same way, but I'm going to be using a very light touch with my brush. So I'm going to be adding water across this, but instead of kind of like aggressively scrubbing like I did with the first layer, I'm very lightly going across. Now, you could take a slightly different tack to this, and let's say you really don't like a part, you could kind of scrub to kind of move some stuff around if you want to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust a few things. So one, I want to make sure I covered this area that kind of got all goofed up. But the other thing is I want to focus on making some of these areas up here a little bit darker. So I'm going to layer on top of this one, and I'm also going to kind of soften it down and then kind of introduce it to that area that was a little bit goofed up. I'm not going to be covering the entire thing with these, but this was on wet, and then I'm also going to switch to a slightly different pink to add a little bit of dimension, because it's going to kind of add to the pigment here, but it's also going to be different enough where it's going to kind of change it and give it a little more depth. And then I'm just going to make sure I kind of put a little bit over that weird area just to kind of disguise it. So you can use these long strokes. The other option is to take your brush and make sure that you have some water in it, but then kind of tap it off, because you can also come in here and kind of just drop in a nice wet area that was a little bit aggressive. So I'm going to put a little more water in my brush and I'm going to soften that out. Let's bring a little bit up over here too. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to dry my brush off. If you've got a whole bunch of standing water, I should have mentioned that the first time. If you've got a whole bunch of standing water along the edges or along the bottom, dry your brush off and just suck that up so you don't get all those back runs that can happen. And I like this layer a lot more than I liked my first layer. It's a little bit more intense. It's going to change quite a bit as it dries, but I was also able to kind of hide that little weird thing that was happening there, and we'll barely be able to see it. This is cold press paper. All right, so this bottom one here, I'm gonna let you guys choose, because I could go either way on this. Do we want to see a second layer on this one? Or do we want to, like, if you're having a problem with yours, for example, if you're like, well, I just want my yellow to be brighter, I can demonstrate that. Or we can move on to the next step of this one and actually placing in one of our kind of foreground elements, or I guess it's a middle ground element. You want the yellow to be a bit brighter. So somebody's asking about the rough dots. So this is cold pressed paper, and cold pressed paper has a lot of texture, and so some colors are going to settle in to some of those. It'll be a little less noticeable once it's dry, but that's what's happening kind of up here, is that this is a cold pressed paper that does have texture. Your cat's very into watching this with you. All right, I think the next step is winning on this one. So we're gonna do that. So for this one, we're gonna add in, I think, kind of a little mountain in the background here. I think we're gonna do this one kind of inspired by this vibe here. And what I want to do is we want to mix up kind of you could use whatever color you want for this. I'm probably going to make a light purple that's kind of a muted, so more of a grayish purple color. And we'll talk about how to do that for this. So one thing I do when I'm cutting my little pieces of paper is I always save the scraps so that I can actually test, because the color is going to look different on the paper. And I'm going to take this purple here, and the color that's on the opposite side of the color wheel to purple is yellow. And I'm going to take just a little bit of this yellow and mix it in, which is going to kind of mute this purple down. So we're going to have kind of a brownish purple color. I'm going to put a little more purple in there actually. We could use this color. The other thing we could do to darken this, you could use black if you want to, but I usually like to use something like a blue to kind of just deepen this. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that blue just to make it a little bit more kind of a stormy color. And this is about how dark I want this next layer to be for this one. Oh, sorry, we're moving on this one. My bad. Okay, so I've got my nice light kind of purple color. The other thing I want you to do is take a look at your painting where you place this kind of yellow spot or something. That is going to be an ideal place to put like a little valley, because it'll kind of make it look like the sun is setting nestled between a little valley, which is just kind of cute. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some of this in our brush, and then for your first layer, so this is dry, remember this is dry, I'm going to just kind of define the tops of the mountains. So I'm just going to kind of bring this down, and remember I wanted a little valley there. Then I'm going to quickly wash my brush, and we're just going to soften down. And I'm getting a little bit, because I kind of ran out, I'm getting a little bit of separation here. It's not going to be a big deal because we can add some additional elements, which will kind of help to disguise this. So you can either, at this point, when you see this kind of separating into there, because this was drier and then I went really wet, we've got a couple options. One, you can just say, it's fine, I will just use that to kind of define what's going on before. Or you can kind of quickly come in with more of that color and then try to be very careful about placing it right where you did before. And this will kind of help to combat. It'll make this part about as wet as the part below it, so you'll get a slightly more even wash of color there. The other thing I want you to take a second to notice is, because we're doing this in layers and we painted the sky across the whole thing first, notice that it's having an interesting effect on the colors of what we're placing on top of it. So it's actually going to kind of create this illusion of it glowing on the mountains without us having to really do anything, where kind of we said the sunset was setting. All right, so this part needs to dry, and then we also need to dry this. So I'm going to, again, I need to use my heat gun to do this. And again, if you are sensitive to loud noises, now is a really good time to turn down your volume for about 30 seconds. And I'm going to give you a countdown starting now in 3, 2, and 1. There we go. Also, I'm loving the enthusiasm we have in the chat. Thank you guys so much. Okay, so what we're doing is we're going to be building, just as an example, let's take a look at this. What we're doing is we're building layers. This is one I did really quickly this morning just before we hopped on because I wanted to play with these colors. But we're building layers by starting with our back layers first that are going to be lighter, and then we kind of get a little bit darker. We get a little more vibrant with our foreground layers as we move closer to us. And what we're doing is we're taking advantage of this illusion thing that happens in real life, which is atmospheric perspective. So things that are further away are a little bit blurrier, they are a little bit more muted in colors, they're lighter, and then as they get closer to us, they're going to get brighter. So it's going to kind of help us create these scenes if we do it in that way, where we're kind of taking advantage of that. We can, without having to do a lot of work, we can actually achieve kind of the look of that depth. Also, how's everybody doing? Is anybody falling behind? Do we need to slow down for a second, or are we good to keep going? I feel like spring allergies are already starting to get me today, even though we still have snow on the ground. Good to go? All right, we're gonna do the same thing with here, although I'm gonna do my best to try to not get that separation like I had, and that's going to require me to have a little bit more water and a little more mixture kind of mixed up. And I kind of feel like for this one, I wanna go blue for some reason, so I'm gonna go blue. All right, so I'm gonna start by grabbing some water and actually putting a little bit more in here. You can also use a spray bottle for this. I'm gonna swirl around my brush in that blue color. I've got a little tester strip. I don't need this to be darker than this, but I do want to change this blue a little bit. And the color that's on the opposite side of blue is orange, so if I want to mute it, I can take a little orange in my brush. What I have in there is quite a bit, so I'm actually going to tap it off because otherwise it would go really, really dark. Even then I still had quite a bit. We're going to get pretty much just gray. It's also my favorite way to mix a black color is to take a phthalo type blue and then a red leaning orange, because you're going to get all the colors all together and you're going to get kind of a grayish black color automatically. I want a little more blue in it though, so I'm going to add in a little more blue. And there we go. We've got kind of a nice gray blue or a steely blue color. This is what color I want for my mountains in the background here. All right, so this one, I'm gonna make sure I filled my brush up with, this is like sopping wet, because this one I went too dry. So we're trying to achieve a better kind of wash. Now this one, again, we wanna kind of evaluate, and I want you to try to frame the interesting parts of your sky. So I'm gonna start up over here, and let's go down here. Then I'm gonna stick some water in my brush and just soften, and hopefully, and let's bring this down. I want this to become almost completely transparent towards the bottom because we are going to be adding in more layers towards the bottom. And look at that. I was able to, because I worked a little bit faster and I also was wetter with the first little stripe of this, I was able to actually kind of achieve where we're getting a little bit of that separation, but not as much. The other thing that I haven't talked about and I've been really noticing is when I do use the heat gun, because I used to use a hair dryer, and hair dryers, they use more air and less heat, and heat guns use less air but more heat, is that I have kind of noticed that with the heat gun, even though it's faster, because it gets hotter, the paper does retain more of that heat, and I do find this happening more often than I did using, like, say, the hair dryer or something, because it's pretty much cooled down, but it is still a little bit warmer than I would expect with the other ones, and I think that is kind of contributing to some of that's happening. But it's all about kind of controlling the wetness. So we have a chance to either just let this do its thing, or we can come back in, and you can, maybe I'm just gonna do it on one side, and we'll let it do that thing on the other side. Maybe we can actually kind of create that into some tree line or something like that. Use it to our advantage so that you can kind of see a little difference there. Okay. Somebody says, Mommy says I need a brush like yours. Yeah, or a size 10 brush or a size 12 brush. Something that looks more like this will work really well too. And then, yeah, taping it down is going to help. And even if you just have Scotch tape works surprisingly well for this. So we're going to move down to this one. I think this is the one that this bottom one is the one I'm gonna do kind of like this. So we're gonna add in a, actually, no. Let's do this one as the top one here, and let's do this bottom one here as more like this one. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I wanna mix up a really kind of dark, or you could go with a black or a, you can use whatever colors you want. We just want a really dark color. So this here is one that I mixed up earlier. It's a really nice dark green. And the way that I mixed this one up, in case you're curious, is I took some different greens. So I would just wet the colors and then scribble around in those greens. And then I would add in, I actually added in purple. And then I would come in with green and blue to kind of combat those two things. So add in some blue and then add in some more green. Maybe go into a different green. And you can kind of just adjust as you go. So see, now it's a little bit, if you wanted it to be a more green instead of that green blue, I'm gonna bring a little more blue in. So we want kind of a darker color than what we've been using so far, but something like this. And then I want you to harness your powers of scribbling, because what we're gonna do to make a little tree line, because we're gonna go on for a goal of like a tree line like this, is we're going to come in, this is dry, remember this is dry, make sure yours is dry before you do this, otherwise the tops are just going to kind of bleed into everything, is we're just going to take our darker green color, and from one side, you could choose the side, I'm just going to start kind of along here, I kind of want it down this bottom third, I'm just going to literally kind of scribble and tap my brush. And I'm going to kind of end it about there, this little tree line. And I want to vary the height of my little scribbles. And then let's have it kind of go off into the distance here. And then at the very end, you can kind of clean up your line. You could also come in with a little more blue if you wanted to kind of darken up towards the bottom to create more shadowing effects. You can drop that in there. That's going to be our little like tree line. The foreground of this one, then we're just going to use like fun colors to kind of hint to like a really bright green and wildflower kind of scene in the foreground. So yeah, I'm using my own color palette here today. However, I do try when I am talking about the colors to talk about general colors, because I know not everybody is going to be using this palette. So yeah, you could use Koi with this, you could use Winsor Newton, you can use whatever color palette you have. I want my tutorials to be accessible to everybody, so you don't have to be using this one to get similar results. You're going to have slightly different colors, but you should be able to do these tutorials with pretty much any set of watercolors. All right, again, I do need to dry in order to move on to the next steps, because this one we're going to be adding in another layer of these mountains here. So I still have some of that color there. And then in this one, we're going to be doing some fun we're going to work on dry brushing, as well as we're going to do some like color dropping in or some charging as well. And then this one up here, we're going to add in more mountains. So I should do more lives because your For You page is flooded with these. Yeah, and I do have, if you're like, I want to go back in and do some more lives, I do have like a whole catalog on YouTube. So again, if anybody is sensitive to noise, you're going to want to turn your volume down now. I'm going to give you a countdown, and I'm going to, while I'm doing this, I'm going to try to multitask and read through the comments that I've missed. So this is going to be loud in 3, 2, and 1. Didn't need to do too much, especially because this one, there's hardly any paint. So one question I saw was somebody said that the palette was repelling the water and not allowing them to really mix up the colors because it just kind of balled up. I saw this tip from, I cannot remember who I saw this from, but they said to take one of those magic erasers or something that has a real micro abrasive, and you can actually kind of scratch it with something like a magic eraser, and that will help to allow you to kind of get it to actually stick to the palette so that it's not so hydrophobic. And yeah, I do think that's true. Also, Sunny brings up a good point, is the more you use it, I mean, like anything you scrape on anything, even something with soft bristles, technically you're going to be kind of creating small scratches, and it does get a little better. But yeah, if you're impatient, you can use something like that. So, all right, so this one we're going to do a second layer of the little mountains. I do still have some of this color, and I kind of want to base it on that, but I'm going to try to make it a little bit darker. So just as a reminder, here is where we are with this color. Kind of a nice light blue. I'm going to put a little more water in my brush just because I do need to make sure I have enough in this little well to actually do this, which is going to require us to add quite a bit more color. But we want it to, I want it to be like one shade darker, just a tiny bit. So again, for this, you could add in black, but I've been muting this color and making it a little more gray by using its complementary color, which is orange. So I'm just going to grab a little bit that's on my palette over here. Yep, I'm actually going to need more. So I will have to touch here. It's so easy to over add in that color though. So, okay, so that is quite a bit darker. That would work, but I think I'm going to put just a little water in my brush. I want to dilute that just a little bit. If you had that difference, it would be fine, but I just want it to be a tiny bit darker than that one. So I've just adjusted a little bit. And on this top one, we're going to add in a second layer of mountains, but I fixed the issue I was having where I was getting these little back runs on this side, and I left them on this side. And we could turn this into a whole bunch of things. We can also use it kind of as the top of our second layer of mountains, and I'm going to do that. So I'm going to use it kind of as a guideline for the second layer of my mountains. Again, I'm going to soften down, and then I'm going to take a dry brush and kind of pull this. I've made this bottom part way darker than I normally would for this, so we're going to have to kind of combat that, but that's okay because it's also a much darker sky. I mean, if we were at this point, things would be pretty dark. So notice that we were able to kind of use the tops of that to our advantage, and it just kind of became the rough edge of a mountain instead of becoming kind of a weird drying area. So you can always use the elements that come afterwards to kind of fix things. All right. So in this one down here, I'm going to be introducing you to a technique that I haven't actually talked about this one very much. There's a chance you've heard of it, but it's not something I've covered. So if you mainly watch my stuff, this is going to be a newer to you one probably. We're going to try, notice that we have some variation in this. And yours is going to look like this to varying degrees, especially if this is the first time you use this, but we're going to try a technique called dry brushing, which is going to allow us to get some interesting textures. It's also going to allow us to try to keep some of the white of the paper preserved so we get some of that variation to create some interest. The key to dry brushing, I'm going to demonstrate this for you, is to use a light touch. You're going to want to take your brush, make sure it's nice and dry. Then you're going to want to pick up a little bit of this color, and you can even kind of tap off. But see how and when we lightly brush across, we can actually get some interesting kind of textures. It's going to just deposit it across the textured paper. You can also do this with a little bit more in your brush, so if you had more in here, you're just going to have a really light touch. So you just kind of want to like lessen as you go. So like really... It's like you set your brush down and then at the very end you're like, I don't even care. I don't even care if anything goes on here. So we can get some interesting textures going here. I want this to be a little bit brighter though in the foreground. So I'm going to I've got some of this green in my brush. I'm going to put a little more in here. And this is the green we use for that tree, or I use for the tree line. And I do usually like to kind of add in a little bit of that into whatever other color I'm adding so that it's kind of, the color story kind of makes sense together. So there was a little bit of yellow in here. So we've got a lighter color, but I want it to be a little bit more vibrant. So I'm actually going to grab some of this yellow. And then I'm really getting a lot of mixing in of this green and this yellow. So I'm going to wash my brush and then I'm going to swirl around to kind of clean that up because that one was starting to look pretty sad. So we got a lot more vibrancy here. We can go even more. Did you notice how that one area repelled the water there when I was testing that? You know what that is? My thumbprint. The oils in my fingers. See if it'll happen again. Apparently I used all my oils, but that's what that was, is, see if we can get it to do it. See, it's the oils in my fingers being deposited there. So you do want to be a little careful about that too. Okay, so we have, I'm going to start with this color. I kind of like this color. And again, I'm going to do that dry brushing technique. So I'm going to put some in my brush, maybe tap it off on the side. And then I'm going to just kind of put the taper of my brush down, and I'm going to start to swipe across and then try not to care at the very end, maybe from the other way. Just creating a couple little, you can kind of see the textures. You can't see it as much as that darker color, but it's a little bit over here, and I'm just going to make a couple little sweeps and swoops just to kind of deposit some colors to get some color kind of layers going, because we're going to do this a few more times and we're going to modify this color. So the next thing I want to do is I want this, maybe my next layer I want to be even more yellow, so I'm going to grab more yellow. Again, I'm going to wash my brush because I'm putting a lot of green into my yellow, which is not ideal. And this time I'm going to tap my brush off a little bit more. And let's do the same thing where we kind of brush across. Oh, that was just on the tape. Brush across very lightly. I'm not getting a ton of this dry brushing on this somehow. I don't know how I just demonstrated dry brushing for you, and then now when I'm painting it, I'm not dry brushing, but that's what's happening. April Fools, we're not dry brushing today. Okay. So we've got a little bit of stuff going here. The other thing I usually like to do is reflect some of the colors from the sky in this. And the way I'm going to do that is I want to take some darker kind of purple bluey colors that I'm going to put in here to bring some more interest. But I'm also going to kind of drop in some of this pink color after I do that. On the wet areas to kind of create the illusion of maybe some like blooming type things. This is one of those things where you have to kind of trust your gut and go for what you think is going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this green to be the primary color I kind of want to be in this space, but I'm also going to be touching into this color here. And I'm also going to be touching into this color. So I'm going to make sure mine are spritzed. Okay, so I'm going to start by modifying this green. So I'm going to grab a little bit more. This is kind of like an army green color. And then I'm going to wash my brush because my greens are spreading through my entire palette. I'm going to take some of this kind of teal color. And I feel like this will be a nice color once I mix it all in to kind of be the base color for this. I need another tester strip. I'm running out of, there we go. Nice and vibrant, but a little bit more saturated as far as the colors go. Okay, so this one I'm going to, again, kind of start the same way, but while it's still a little bit wet, because these are still, they're probably still slightly damp, but I was putting very, very thin layers, so they're pretty much dry. But I'm going to kind of go a little bit more aggressive on this. We're going to kind of see some of those other layers behind in some areas. I don't want to completely cover everything. And now I'm going to kind of scribble around in my darker colors. And while this is still a little wet, I'm going to kind of just place this in a couple areas just to create some variation. I might even kind of try to grab, actually let's try to grab maybe some of that purple color. Let's put that in a couple areas just to kind of get some variation. You don't have to do this, but I'm just kind of trying. I'm trying not to be too aggressive with it, but it's I had a little more in my brush than I meant to. And then I'm going to come in, wash my brush, and I'm going to find the areas that are still wet, and I'm going to take that pink in my brush, and I'm just going to drop it in a couple areas. Like, oh look, there's a little little patch of wildflowers here. Maybe even smaller ones back here. Oh, that was not very wet. We want to do this in the wet areas so that we don't want it to be super defined. We want it to be the illusion of. But see how we can get some little, like, oh look, is it wildflowers or is it not? The ones that happen here I don't love, so I'm just going to wash my brush and just kind of, let's just soften those in. There we go. That's better. You know what? I feel like this one I feel like I could improve in some ways, but I also feel like I'm right at this edge of really messing this one up. So I think I'm going to leave this one as it is because I'm pretty happy with it, even though I feel like it could be a little better. I kind of think I'm at this stage where I'm going to ruin it. So we're just going to leave that one as it is, and this one is going to be done. If yours is like, you're like, wait till you take the tape off because you get like this 10%, extra credit boost. So you might be more pleased than you expect to be in a moment. We do need to work on this one, and this one I do need to make sure is a little bit drier. We're going to be a little more aggressive with the drop-in colors on this one, but I do need to make sure this is dry. So again, I'm going to be turning on the evil noise machine. So if you are sensitive to noise, you're going to want to turn your volume down for about 30 seconds in 3, 2, and 1. All right. So this one's going to be more inspired by this, where we're going to kind of do these two hills. And I'm going to try to do an even better job of kind of creating a little more depth on these hills. We're going to try. I don't know how well it's going to work, but we're going to attempt. We are going to need to mix up a decent amount of a green. And remember that when we layer colors over other colors, since this one's already kind of darker, if I were to take this light green color and put it over that blue, see how much darker that is than on the sides? So we're already going to have a little bit darker here, but we're going to mix up a decent amount of this. So I'm going to put a little more water right in here, and then we're going to take some green colors. Again, I'm going to take, I don't know why, but this kind of army green color is kind of calling to me. In my palette is called guacamole. I'm sure that those of you who have looked at my website have realized that I am food motivated. If I were a dog, I would be always ready to hear the treat jar, for sure. Because all my colors are kind of named after food type things, or that's what I typically try to name them after. Sometimes they don't, but it's my favorite thing to do. I'm gonna put a little blue in there. That was a lot of blue. And let's just check it. So that's a little bit too dark. So the original, and we're not entirely like trying to replicate the original one to a T. It's kind of our inspiration. I should have actually talked about this. I'm gonna take a little of this green, or this yellow. But when I am doing these like little landscapes, each one turns out a little differently. And actually one of the things that I'm gonna encourage you to do, if you were like, this was kind of fun, is tape down like 4 of these and take like the same composition. So you could take this same thing, but paint it a little bit different each time. Maybe change the direction the colors kind of angle or change the actual colors you use, and see how much you can change the vibe of the whole thing, even though it's basically the same. But we're gonna kind of try to emulate that one a little bit. So I've got a bit of a lighter green now. It's a little bit lighter. And I'm gonna fill up my whole brush with this. And then I've got my water because I'm gonna be dipping into that in a second too. And let's make it into two little kind of hills. So we're gonna come down and come down. And then I'm gonna wash my brush and soften down again because I do want there to be some variation. Let's take a little darker green. I said I was gonna try to get a little more hint to these hills. So let's kind of drop in some additional colors that are gonna kind of help us get a little more texture. This middle part would probably have the sun kind of shining through it, so we might want that to be a little bit lighter. This doesn't need to be perfect though, because the next thing we're going to do, once it's nice and wet, see if you can see the shine, is we're going to start by taking some of this yellow. I'm going to swirl my brush around in here. And in the foreground, I'm going to start with the ones that are in the foreground because there's going to be more in my brush. I'm just going to kind of tap around a little bit. And then once I've taken quite a bit out of my brush with the very tip, I can kind of, in the background, oops, I went a little bit too much. I can do some smaller, slightly smaller ones here. Just adding in a couple of those. You could even come to the very kind of tops if you wanted to kind of change a little bit to really put some emphasis towards the top. So if you're having some weird thing happen here, you can always kind of drop in more. I'm going to wash my brush, and now we're going to go into the pink color. Put a little of that in my brush, and then we're going to drop these in. Again, I'm going to start with the ones that are in the foreground, like right up kind of to the edge, because there's going to be more in my brush, which will help us get some out. If you need to, you can always tap your brush off to get a little bit drier to make them a little bit smaller for the ones that are a little further back. Nick is watching Star Trek upstairs. I can hear Gowron talking. Off. And this is a good time to kind of just be patient and like see what's going on. Wait for it to do its thing for a minute because these are going to change quite a bit. I'm going to wash my brush. I'm kind of thinking I'm going to grab this pink. This pink is more of kind of an opaque pink. And I'm going to put that in a couple areas because it's going to have a little more coverage than the other pink. The other one's more translucent. And we're going to drop this in before things get too dry in a couple areas, especially in the foreground. Okay, we're kind of trying to let this dry a little bit more. Oh wow, our time has gone by really fast today. I was thinking I was going to be painting like 4 more of these. I think these are going to be the ones we're painting, so good thing we didn't start on a bunch more. That was a good call by the comments. I'm waiting for this to dry a little bit more until the very bottom is pretty much mattified because I do want to kind of hint to some of the greenery that would be on the bottoms of where these little flowers are. But I want it to soften a little bit, but I don't want it to completely spread everywhere and go straight into the pinks and the greens we have. The paper doesn't necessarily wrinkle. You might be able to see there's a very small bend to it. But once I dry it, it'll pretty much stop that. So, okay, I'm waiting. I'm starting to get, it's really mattified under these. So I'm getting close. So I'm going to prepare by kind of grabbing, I'm going to take some of this and then put it into this one. And let's just test this color. Ooh, that's a nice color. Okay, and yeah, this is kind of the brush stroke I'm going to be doing, is just kind of an up and down kind of a thing. You can kind of take your brush and flatten it, and then you can use the edge to kind of create really fine lines. And where it is mattified right at the bottom, I'm going to kind of start to swipe in some more greenery. I need a little more. And I am getting a little more spreading in a couple of these areas. You're going to kind of have to feel out some of them to see how defined you want it to be. I kind of want to actually kind of hint to a little definition. Not too much, because, you know, the rest of this painting is not like hyper realistic or very detailed. I want to kind of be able to see the vertical nature of how these stems would be a little bit vertical. To kind of hint to that. Just a little bit. Okay. And I think that's about all I'm going to do, just because of this one I went a little bit darker in the foreground. It would have been better if I had made my mountains a little bit lighter or been able to wash them out a little bit more, but it's okay. You know, we adapt in watercolor, and that's going to be, I think, actually where I call both of these. Now, the best way to remove tape is there's a couple techniques. One is you want your paintings to be dry. When the paper is wet, it is going to be more fragile, and so it's going to be more able to be damaged. So this is still pretty wet down here, so I wouldn't want to start to remove this. I will be removing this, don't worry. But the other thing is heat can help release the adhesive. If you use too much heat, you're going to transfer all the adhesive on here, but if you just kind of heat it up a little bit, it kind of helps to lift it, and then you can pull it. And the other thing is I want to pull it at an angle. So mine are taped around towards the back. So instead of coming and pulling like this, I want to take and pull out and away like this. And that is going to help take this off without damaging. So if you were me right now, what I would do is I would take a second to dry these. I would heat the tape up a little bit, and then I would do this. Now I'm just going to go for it because we've had enough interruptions with the heat gun. But yeah, also if you wait till it's completely dry, you're going to get less of this. See, mine was still pretty wet, so I'm going to get a little bleeding. But I do recommend giving yourself the satisfaction of actually seeing how these look when you take the tape off, because they look like little Polaroids. They're so cute. You're gonna feel better. Even if you like your painting, you're still gonna feel better about it once you take the tape off, because it's gonna be like, oh, how cute. Okay. Take that one off. Again, this should have been dry, but I didn't dry it. And take that off. Trying to be careful here. Trying to make sure I use that angle. While we're wrapping up here today, I just want to thank you guys for taking some time to spend some time and paint with me today. I really do enjoy doing these little, painting sessions with you guys. Also, I really love seeing what you guys paint. Okay, I did get a bit of tearing. Oh well. Should have listened to my own advice. But yeah, I love seeing what you guys paint. So if you feel like making a post on TikTok or Instagram and tagging me, I love seeing it. Look how cute these are once you take the tape off. Oop, I'm out of frame, sorry. They're so cute with the tape, with the little edges. Again, I really appreciate the time you guys take with me. And yeah, if you're brand new to watercolor and you did this, you just learned so many techniques. You learned wet on wet, you learned charging, you learned layering, you learned dry brushing. So like, you're going to have learned a whole bunch of stuff that will allow you to watch not only my tutorials, but other people's tutorials and be like, oh, I kind of know what I'm doing here. So yeah, anyways, I hope everybody has a really, really wonderful day. And I will see you guys in 2 weeks.